Welcome. Welcome all, and thank you for attending TAFE Directors Australia online conference, Linkages, One Tertiary Education System. For those who do not know me, I am Jenny Dodd. I am the CEO of TDA. I want to thank the TDA Secretariat for their work on this event, Linkages, One Tertiary Education System. It has proved to be popular with nearly 1,000 registrations. I also want to thank all TDA corporate affiliates whose logos appeared on the slides earlier, in particular MyEquals, who is the sponsor for today. TDA's corporate affiliates make it possible for us to bring these thought leadership sessions free of charge to the tertiary education sector. At the start of this online conference, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. We're all coming from different parts of Australia. Today, I am coming to you from Ngunnawal country, Yuma. Some logistics now for today. There is the closed captioning option, which you can activate if you wish. We have 3 time slots today, and you will need to join each time slot separately. This keynote is 1, which has 2 speakers, the Minister and the Honourable Jenny Macklin. Then we have a 15-minute break, followed by the next keynote, another short break, and then you get to choose between 2 alternatives. You will need to join each of the sessions separately through the event lobby. Look for the join button beside the title of each session. Now let's begin. TDA planned this online conference at the start of the year to discuss One Tertiary Education System. But wow, so much has happened since then. Shortly we'll hear from one of the members of the University Accord panel on aspects of the Accord Interim report. We will also have a presentation by 2 people who were engaged in the AQF reform review in 2019. And finally, for you, the participants, you can choose from 2 sessions, one a panel, which will discuss is harmonisation possible between vet and higher education, and one a practice session where 3 of TDA members will provide their insights into what they are already doing in linking vocational education and training with higher education. Thank you to all our speakers, our panellists, and our presenters. Let's now turn to our first speaker. Yesterday was important. It was the release of the National Skills Agreement. So how timely it is that we have the Minister for Skills and Training, the Honourable Brendan O'Connor, to open Linkages, One Tertiary Education System. Welcome, Minister O'Connor.
Good. All good to go. Oh, thank you very much, Jenny. It's great to join you at this conference, this important gathering of the sector involving, I know, many representatives from outside the vet sector too. That's a very good thing. We'll have to be pretty efficient because I don't tend to have speeches less than 1 hour before question time, but given the importance of this gathering and given the importance, as you said, of the announcement yesterday, I'm very happy to join you and just go through some of the elements of what is pretty important. It's a landmark agreement. It's the first national skills agreement for 11 years, and it really is a vehicle to provide reform to the sector to make sure that it's fit for purpose to deliver skills to students and trainees, apprentices, to workers, to businesses in our economy. So we're very pleased with the agreement. We really do acknowledge and appreciate the efforts by state and territory governments to reconcile any outstanding matters so that we could announce this week. It's really important that we had this acquitted because it takes effect from January next year. And as I say, providing certainty for the vet sector and bringing about significant reforms. And I'll just touch on a number of those. Firstly, we want to make sure that the qualifications of the vet sector are, again, fit for our economy and our labour market. We're undertaking work there. We want to make sure that the sector collaborates more effectively with the other critical tertiary sector, the universities, And I think whilst we already see that happening organically, it's patchy, and we really do need to provide some strategic investment and stewardship in order to ensure that happens. And that's why we're looking to set up centres of excellence, which will help the collaboration between universities and TAFEs and other vet providers. We want to see a different way of training and different courses and indeed different qualifications, including the increase in higher apprenticeships, and that will be happening in the vet sector, but so too in universities. I'm working very closely with my friend and colleague, Minister Jason Clare, Minister for Education, as he works through, of course, his vehicle for change, namely the Accord. And I think whilst we're at different stages of development, both vehicles, the National Skills Agreement and now its implementation, and the Accord and the work there, are working hand in hand to ensure that we bring about reform. Now, unfortunately, because it is Parliament, the bells are ringing, and I am now a slave to the chamber, and I have to, unfortunately, leave. Which I'm sorry about. If I can get back as quickly as I can. I don't want to interrupt Jenny, either Jenny Dodd or Jenny Macklin, but if I can come back, I will. Question time's in 50 minutes, the division's happening, and I'm scared of the whip, the only person in Parliament I'm scared of, and I apologise.
Thank you, Minister. We appreciate it. And we feel that we're moving now to someone with whom we're in very good hands. So thank you, Minister O'Connor. I'm delighted to introduce, Jenny, you might just pop on mute. I'm delighted to introduce Minister O'Connor's colleague of many years, the Honourable Jenny Macklin. Jenny is Vice-Chancellor's Fellow from the University of Melbourne, and Jenny is here today for many reasons, but not least of which is that she's a panel member of the Australian Universities Accord. Prior to this, Jenny served for 23 years as the federal member for Jagga Jagga in Victoria. Jenny was the first woman to become the deputy leader of a major Australian political party, and she was the deputy leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party from 2001 to 2006. The way we're structured today is Jenny and I are going to have a chat. So I'm going to ask Jenny some questions, and she's going to explore the Australian Universities Accord Interim Report. You are, of course, all welcome to use the chat function for your chat and commentary with each other throughout this session. However, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A, which you can see at the bottom of your screen there. We're not sure that we're going to have time in this session for a Q&A, and it might depend whether the Minister returns, but I suspect that won't be the case. But we're not sure we will have time for questions, but we'll see how we go. So let's get going. Jenny, it's 3 months since the Australian Universities Accord Interim Report was released. Since then, there have been a range of other announcements, policy directions and publications, including the Employment White Paper, the Jobs and Skills Symposium, and of course, yesterday, the National Skills Agreement. We planned this half-day conference at the start of 2023, and our theme then was going to be about pathways. Well, lots has changed since then, and it's been amazing how much has gone on this year. Today, though, we're going to talk about the Accord Interim Report. So let's start with a visual question first. The Accord Interim Report has an echidna on its front cover. Jenny, can you explain what it was that led the Accord panel to use that image? I think it's important because it sets the tone for much of the work you are doing.
Thanks very much, Jenny. And you're right. There's been a lot go on and a lot achieved that goes very much to this whole question that you're raising about linkages. Mary O'Kane, the chair of the Universities Accord panel, talks a lot about spiky ideas. So the notion of spiky really came from her. But the echidna on the front really has another special symbolism, which came from another panel member, First Nations woman Larissa Barent, And she was able to share the cultural story of the echidna from her country. And it's one that speaks to, and I think this is a lovely way of thinking about the notion of an accord, that this echidna demonstrates and speaks to the importance of sharing and reciprocity. So I think as we seek to build an accord, we are seeking to do it in a way that brings people together, where we share ideas, where we link together, and we do it in a respectful way.
So, Danny, I guess that sort of answers the next question I have, which is why was it called an accord? It's not a review, it's not a reform, it's called an accord. So, in the context of the panel, you've engaged widely. Would you like to explore that a little further?
Sure. Well, of course, originally it came from the government, and the terms of reference for our work really asked us to think about what it would take to build an accord. And the word accord to us means bringing people together. But most importantly, I like to emphasize that it's not just a one-off. It's about building an enduring accord, bringing people together from a range of different important interests that are essential to the building of a tertiary education system that's fit for purpose. So whether it's TAFEs, of course, universities, other vet providers, employers, unions, a range of different interests that all need to come together. One of the difficulties, I think, in the current arrangements is that there isn't a place where people are brought together. And I would personally really like to see the way in which this accord can be built, really, so that it grows and develops into the future.
Jenny? And I think from TAFE's perspective, and I can speak for some of for my colleagues, the CEOs of TAFEs around the country, you have genuinely engaged with us. We've had the opportunity to present not only written submissions, which are on the TAFE Directors Australia website, but also the opportunity to engage with you and Mary and Barney and Fiona and all members of the Accord panel to tease out some of the things that are important for TAFE. There are numerous critical challenges that the interim report sets out to tackle. At its heart, and I quote, "The overall goal must be growth for skills through greater equity." Can you unpack that question of equity? It is such a central piece as it is handled in the Accord interim report.
Yes, it is. It's absolutely central. And maybe if I go back just one step, you'd be all familiar with the work that Jobs and Skills Australia have done to really demonstrate that for the future, 90% of jobs are created over the next 5 years. So not a very long period. Over the next 5 years, 90% of those jobs will require a tertiary education, a tertiary qualification. So that's a very important starting point and puts a lot of, what's the best word for me to use? I don't want to use a negative word. A lot of pressure, though, on the need for the system to really deliver for the sake of individuals and their capacity to live a good life and get the jobs they want, and also for the future of the country and the economy. So I think we need to start there. From the point of view of higher education, the estimate is that we're going to need 50% of people to have a higher qualification. So that's also a very significant challenge in the current environment, where we've actually seen the numbers of students at universities and completions going down. So it's I think that's the frame in which we have to remember we're placed at the moment. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone in this audience the huge skills challenge that we have. So I won't go through any of that detail. I'm sure everybody understands just how big the challenge is. And if it's big now, it's projected to get very, very large over the next little while. So come to the point that is in your question about equity. We're actually, we are faced with this very big skills challenge and qualification challenge, but we also have a very, very large equity problem in the tertiary education system at the moment. And that from the point of view of building a socially cohesive country for the future, giving everyone the opportunity to get the education and training they need and want so that they get the jobs and understandings of the world that they desire, then we really do need to make sure that we set and achieve much higher targets of equity participation. So the numbers of First Nations people who are getting either a TAFE or university qualification, the numbers of people with disability, the numbers of people in rural and remote communities, and of course our outer suburban communities. So we've got a very, very significant number of people who at the moment are not getting the chance to get either a higher education or a vocational education or training qualification. That's just not good enough. It's not good enough for the individuals, and it's certainly not good enough for the country. And without those people, and this is really the critical point that leads to the expression skills and equity, then we're not going to be able to meet the skills challenge. We have to get more people from these more disadvantaged backgrounds to be able to get the qualifications that they need and that the economy needs.
Which, of course, is going to take all of us working in tertiary education to collaborate and work together, because from a TAFE perspective, and unashamedly, that's who we are in terms of running this event today, sometimes we'd say maybe entering via TAFE is possibly a great place for people to start, and that can open up doors to education more broadly. And recently, TDA runs a fee-free TAFE network where we bring together all our TAFEs who are delivering in fee-free. And one of our members from Victoria said, we've got to remember that a lot of this is about not just getting a job, but it is also about getting into education and understanding the empowerment of education for that next opportunity in that career-long learning environment. So, Jenny, the focus of the interim report in many ways was on skills. That in itself was a really interesting perspective. In the review, it states the review is investigating further actions to improve the way skills are developed, described, and recognised within a more integrated tertiary education system. Well, that's the nub of today. What do we mean by a more integrated tertiary education system as seen by the Accord panel? And I think you've grappled with lots of different components of this as you've explored the last 8 or 9 months. Thanks, Jenny.
That's very true. And just to say at the outset that I agree with you that for some people coming in via TAFE to start their education or training journey is exactly what suits them. And so we want to, with you and with others as we build this accord, make sure that people are given that opportunity to the best extent we possibly can. One of the exciting things, as you said in your introduction, is that, of course, we've already seen some initiatives announced by the government, whether it's the development of the skills passport to really enable people to have their qualifications recognised and for people to be able to carry that passport with them from job to job, and from educational training institute to another, So I think that initiative from the government is very exciting. The TAFE Centres of Excellence, another area that I know you may want to delve into more deeply. I think that's another area of exciting innovation, an area where universities and TAFEs can come together and really demonstrate in areas of serious skill shortage just how this integration can be delivered in places of need. So we've already got two areas which we touched on in our interim report, but which others, of course, have also emphasised. We've said in our interim report that we really want to see the development of a tertiary education commission that brings all the different players together. So that too is a way in which we can bring people together to talk about what are the changes that are needed. Something that's one particular technical piece of work that's so important, a review, as you know, that was done a few years ago, and I know you're talking about this in your conference, the need for AQF reform. That too, absolutely critical as far as the Accord panel's concerned. So that's another piece that needs to be worked on. The capacity for higher education and vocational education to build new qualifications. That may be something that is done through the proposed Tertiary Education Commission. It may also be something that is tried out in the TAFE Centres of Excellence. But I think there are other ways in which that could be done too in some of the dual sector universities that exist around Australia. One of the things that you and the TDA have pressed with the Accord panel, which we touch on in our interim report, having Commonwealth-supported places available in some of our TAFEs around Australia, where they're wanting to deliver university-level qualifications. So they're just some of the initiatives. There are more, of course, that we put forward in our interim report that people can have a look at. The creation of a jobs broker, work integrated learning, making sure that placements work better for students and for employers. All of these initiatives would be, I think, very useful to meeting the needs that have been outlined.
Thanks, Jenny. Let's dive deeply a bit into the TAFE Centres of Excellence then, because it's sort of been boiling away. And then the National Skills Agreement yesterday made it really clear that it's going to be funded at over 300 million. And of course, there's state contribution to that as well. My understanding of the TAFE Centres of Excellence is the importance of a national response, and this is going to be a bit of a game changer to how TAFEs work with each other, and certainly work more broadly with industry, which we're good at doing anyway, but changes how we also work with the university sector. So TAFE Centres of Excellence is now proposed, and they're also mentioned in the employment white paper, are likely to be a fundamental place where TAFE expertise in working with industry, TAFE national collaboration and TAFE uni partnerships and industry responsiveness, as well as teaching and learning excellence, are maximised. More thoughts on how the Accord panel sees that and your response to them being TAFE Centres of Excellence?
Well, I'm very supportive of this idea, and I think it's such an exciting development, and one where the government, of course, has already decided to put its money where its mouth is, if you like, and to make sure that these linkages that you're talking about today, that we really emphasise in our interim report, really get to take off right away. One of the other things that I know the Minister has emphasised is the need, and this one thing I'd like to focus on today, is the need to focus these centres of excellence on the areas of acute need. So whether it's to make sure that we address both the skill shortages, but also the need to develop new styles of qualification between the different levels of AQF, that we may not have the same types of qualifications that we have at the moment. These new centres may enable new qualifications to be developed, particularly in the areas of acute need. So clean energy, of course, desperately needed. The areas of extreme shortage, particularly in the health sector and the care sector. For teachers, of course, we're desperately short of early childhood educators, many of whom come through both TAFE and university qualification methods. The areas of really high quality manufacturing, or as the government likes to talk about, sovereign capability. So these are just some of the areas. And I think what we're saying on the Accord panel and what's being talked about with these centres of excellence will really enable us all to focus in on these areas of urgent need for the country, and to meet the skills needs and opportunities. I think we always need to remember that these are real opportunities for individuals and people who want to be able to participate in these really exciting new areas, and also areas of very significant demand.
Yeah, and I think that whole national priority focus is something that's come through so strongly yesterday when the National Skills Agreement information was released. It's a shift away from saying this is just a student-led demand system, although equally that's equally important, but there is also clearly strategic investment in things that are needed for Australia in critical industries and in national priority areas. It's an interesting development. And I think the TAFE Centres of Excellence and the expertise that TAFEs have in working with industry and other partners will be places in which that can be explored. I think it's one of the most exciting things I've seen for a long time in our sector. So we're very pleased about that particular development. Jenny, let's now turn to the proposed Tertiary Education Commission, which was in your report. And there were some subcommittees of that as well, which you might also like to explore in your answer. An interesting idea to be throwing around. I've had the privilege of listening to someone from Tertiary Education Commission in New Zealand talk. And I think for the benefit of this audience, you might need to explore a bit what it is and why it is the Accord panel are teasing out the possibility of the introduction of a Tertiary Education Commission.
Thanks very much. I think first and foremost, we need a place where people can come together to build the Accord. You need an institutional framework to do that. At the moment, that doesn't exist. We have universities, of course, which are independently governed and, of course, responsible to the states in a legislative sense. There's Commonwealth state funding arrangements. There's all sorts of complicated arrangements for TAFE and VET. We're all very familiar with all the complex arrangements that currently exist. But there's nowhere at the moment where all that comes together. So that's the first thing. And if we want to build an institutional way in which we can have an enduring accord, I think we need a place where that can be done, and a place where all those different interests are able to be represented. I'd like to see it called a tertiary education system. That's my view, my personal view. Of course, what comes out of the final report of the Accord panel remains to be seen. And then it's, of course, up to the government to decide what it will do. But I would love to see the opportunity of universities and TAFEs and other vet providers are able to come together to really think about how we can meet these very, very large skills challenges for the future. They are very, very significant, and they're not going to be able to be met, in my view, by one part of the sector alone. And I think it's important for us to work with business and unions, as well as the two parts of the tertiary education and training system. So that's really the sort of overarching reason, if you like. There's also some very important jobs that need doing. Maybe if I just talk about higher education now, certainly in higher education, we think that there's a need for a pricing authority inside the Tertiary Education Commission to really make sure that we, the country, understands what it costs to deliver different types of courses, what it costs to teach medicine, for example, compared to law, or nursing compared to teaching, whatever the qualification might be. We really don't have as good information as we should have about those matters. So we think there is a critical need for such a pricing authority. Of course, these issues of price are important right across the system, but we also respect the fact that as far as the vocational education and training system is concerned, these are matters for the Commonwealth and the states. I would like to see the Commonwealth and the states coming together on these tertiary issues as soon as possible. Of course, we've just seen the signing of the new skills agreement, so that was an important first step. But let's see how we can build on that to create a strong tertiary education system for the future. So they're just some of the tasks and some of the reasons that we're so interested in this idea.
And I think it is important for everyone to remember this did begin, and you've said it just in that answer there, as a universities accord. So there's a lot here that is about how universities function in terms of funding arrangements and so on. It's important. A question's just come up, and I'm just going to respond to this. Isn't the Tertiary Commission like the JSA? Well, I think for all the people who are part of the audience here, who've no doubt read every TDA submission that we've submitted to the Accord, we initially said we weren't sure about the Tertiary Education Commission because it might end up being yet another body. But as we've moved on, it's not like JSA, because JSA is about identifying what we need, and the tertiary education system is really about how the tertiary system would then deliver to that. Do you think that's a reasonable separation between the two, Jenny? Anything else you might like to add in there?
Well, I saw the question come up in the chat, so thank you very much to whoever that came from. It is a very different idea to the JSA. But we think the JSA is an incredibly important institution, providing the data that the country needs about the skills needs of the country, and a range of other technical pieces of work that are absolutely critical. And of course, the way in which the JSA is going about that isn't dissimilar from the way in which we would like to see an Accord work, so bringing different interests together. But the notion of a tertiary education commission would be quite different in that it would, in the way that we've suggested, it would actually have the task of working with, in the first instance, the universities to negotiate mission-based compacts with the universities, work out the funding for individual areas of qualification, the costs of them, negotiating overall levels of funding for individual universities. So it's quite a different task to the JSA. But we do see the work of the JSA as absolutely integral to the information that the Tertiary Education Commission would need.
And I think that's why in our last submission, TDA has been very supportive of the Tertiary Education Commission, because we see it as a place where, I mean, you've discussed how the university funding, etc., might work and so on. We also think it might be a place where you can actually do some of that innovation in a way that very deliberately, if you like, through some of those mission-based compacts or whatever they're termed in this new iteration, actually gives some piloting to how we can be a more integrated sector. So I think that there's been some shifts in our thinking and seeing it not just as another thing that might be around the sector, but as something that would be very instrumental in this deliberate process of trying to look more holistically at what tertiary education looks like.
Well, maybe if I could just add to that, Jenny, it's true we'd like to see some innovation, but it's also the case that we need a place where future planning is done. At the moment, that's not really there. That task doesn't have a home. And I think that's absolutely critical. So there are many, many parts of Australia that where people do not have good access to higher education. Leave aside the vet side, but it's given our primary responsibility for making sure that people in Australia who currently don't have access to higher education, that is addressed. Then it has to be someone's responsibility to actually think about and plan for the future. We haven't had a new university in Australia for quite some time. Think about that. Think about the massive growth taking place in the outer suburbs of our big cities, where people have pretty poor access, not to mention the rural and remote communities. So I think there's a very, very big planning task.
That's interesting. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for delving a bit deeper into that, because I think it does. I think your explanation of that helps to make it clear how you have these different bodies with their separate purposes, but working together to inform the whole direction and purpose going forward. Thank you. So, Jenny, my last question for you from the ones that we've talked about, and then we'll come to, if you're okay, we'll come to a couple that have come up through the Q&A. And there's a question in the Q&A a bit similar to this that's come from Ron Jackson, but it's similar to this one. Jenny, you're on record as saying vet and higher education are different, and we don't necessarily want them to be the same. But you've also talked about the complementary nature of them and the importance of them working closely together. You've also talked about today that if we're to meet those higher targets for knowledge and skills, that's going to require both components coming together, not just being about higher education. The report describes a coherent national tertiary system. Do you think we can achieve that? And what do you think is going to come out of the Accord that will make that happen?
Well, we've talked a lot about what's going to be needed to make it happen, and it will be a lot of work because there are so many areas that need attention, many of which we've already touched on in our conversation today. I do think TAFE and vocational education is different, and there's nothing bad about that. I think there's a lot of strengths in it. I certainly would like to see parity of esteem. I think both TAFE and vocational education is enormously important to individuals and the skills and training that they develop and learn from either TAFE or other forms of vocational education. But I also know that there's outstanding knowledge creation and education that's delivered and achieved by individuals and, of course, the whole higher education system. That too is enormously important to Australia. We haven't talked about knowledge creation, but that is so critical to the future of our country. And if you think about those 4 areas of priority that we touched on for centres of excellence, climate change, the needs of the care sector, and so on, I won't go through them all again. We also need active and strong research presence in each of those areas, and that needs support, strong support. So I can't emphasise that enough. So I definitely do not want to suggest that we want everybody to be the same. We don't. That wouldn't be good for anybody. But we do need to think about the whole system and the ways in which that can best come together. That's why I like the idea of a tertiary education commission, because, as I said before, you need a governance framework to build that. You know yourself, you've got TAFE Directors Australia. You've created an institutional framework to enable you to come together. It's the same here. We don't have an institutional framework that enables people to come together to think about and deliver what Australia really needs for the future of our tertiary education system.
Thanks, Jenny. I think we're going to turn our attention now to a few of the questions, and I think that piece you just gave probably answered one of these first questions here from Margot, which is could you comment on the notion of recognising the importance of both knowledge and skills? And it comes to the issue of parity of esteem. I think you've explored that, but any other comments you might like to make there?
Well, it is something I feel very strongly about. So, as you know, and I want to see our vocational education and training system grow and prosper as much as I want to see the university system. So both have an enormously important role to play in achieving excellence into the future. How do we do that better? How do we do it in areas of extreme national need? All of these issues have to be addressed, and I hope that as a result of the work that we're doing for the Accord, that we'll be able to put forward some practical solutions as we set out in the interim report that really help people see how that might happen.
And perhaps it's true in the construct of the VET products that there is a lot of knowledge, and it's a somewhat artificial division to talk about one being knowledge and one being skills. But we will hear more from Sally and Megan when they explore the AQF conversation around that. But
yes, I was glad to see they were going to do that rather than me.
So, Jenny, there's a couple of questions now coming up in the chat. They're different in nature to each other, but they're still hitting on the same thing. And they're both, well, there's a few of them talking about how are we going to achieve these equity outcomes. David Coleman from South Australia asks, you mentioned the underrepresentation of cohorts and communities in tertiary education. What are your thoughts on the idea that competition for funding, often annually allocated, that is the market model, that's been a key feature of VET, has failed to meet equity aspirations? Has the contestable model of funding had its time? Now, this is outside your purvey of the Accord, so you may or may not want to make a comment on that. But that is also a theme that Elaine asked, which she talks about, have we got the right structures for equity? The sectors and systems have no overarching mechanisms, which in some ways you have talked about, to implement equity, monitor and evaluate, and so to make it accountable. There's no synchronicity between Commonwealth and states re-equity. So Some more comments around equity in terms of both the market system for vet. Has it actually distorted maybe the equity discussion? And also, you know, maybe a few more conversation about the frameworks that we need to ensure some of this might occur.
Well, it's probably outside my terms of reference to talk about what's happened in the past in vocational education and training, although I did have quite a lot to say about it in the review I did for the Victorian government a couple of years ago, if people want to know where I'm coming from, but probably not appropriate for me to go there with my Today hat on. So if I can talk about it from the point of view of the Accord panel's work and thinking. When we first did this work, we really were thinking about meeting these equity targets in higher education. But the more we've thought about it, we thought if we really are on about building a stronger tertiary education system, we really should be developing tertiary education and training targets for or equity targets is the expression I would use. So we're doing some more work on that right now. So you can expect to see some of that come out of our final report. We do understand that a lot of the very important work for equity students happens in TAFE and other vocational providers and community providers, I must say. So as I understand it, I haven't had a chance to look at the detail of the new National Skills Agreement, but as I understand it, there's quite a significant allocation of funds for foundational skills. Absolutely imperative that this work is done and more of it is done because without those foundational skills that are done so well in TAFEs, but also many community providers, I want to add, then we're really not going to see the foundations available. But the other areas for people who do want to come to university, often not through the ATAR route, they might benefit, we think, and this is one of the initiatives that we talked about in the interim report, really benefit from enabling places now in universities. So some universities already do this and do it well, do it very, very well. But once again, there's no overarching target. That doesn't exist. There's no overarching approaches that have been agreed and funded to make sure you've now got that in the TAFE and VET area in the new skills agreement, but that doesn't exist in higher education in a broad sense. So they're just two examples that I would use. There are many others that we need. One of the recommendations that the government's already picked up from our interim report was these regional university centres. And these are great examples already, the ones that already exist in different parts of Australia. We were talking recently to the woman who runs the one in Geraldton. Wonderful approach to making sure that students in Geraldton and other regional and remote parts of WA are able to get access to a tertiary education with support. Now the government's put some extra money into making sure that these regional university centres are going to be available around the country, more of them, including in outer suburban areas. So how they might be developed, with vocational providers remains to be seen. The government's really only just announced these with some money, and they're out talking with people about what they'll look like. So it's sort of, we've done our bit by recommending them, and now it's the government taking over to work out the detail of what they'll look like and what they'll deliver.
And on that, on those suburban hubs, we're very supportive of them, but we'd like to see the name be not about universities, but about tertiary. So it does embrace those students for whom maybe the title university may in itself be a barrier, if you like. So we're keen for there to be a more inclusive name. That gets me to a question. I'll let Jenny draw a breath for a moment because I might answer this one from Neil Fernandez, which is the proposed TAFE Centres of Excellence. No, they certainly don't exclude organisations like people who might be delivering specifically in community organisations or community RTOs, one or other, into First Nations people. In fact, we would see TAFE Centres of Excellence being a very collaborative model that is about meeting industry needs or meeting community needs, if that's how they're developed, working with industry, working with universities, but certainly working with other providers if there is benefit for the target groups for which those target groups occur. What's been great about calling them TAFE Centres of Excellence is that it actually gives them a place where the leadership will come from the public provider in vocational education and training. And from TDA's perspective, that's a really good signal to send, but they'll certainly be collaborative places. The next question then, which I'll now throw across to you, Jenny, is a question again by Elaine, which is about micro-credentials. How will the provision, funding and accreditation of micro-credentials, has the Accord tackled this, be regulated and governed between universities and TAFE or VET in a contestable marketplace? That might be a broader question about micro-credentials for universities in the Accord overall. So any comments there on micro-credentials, Jenny?
Yes, we are giving a lot of thought to this. So we haven't come to a final view of what our recommendations will be, but all of those issues that Elaine mentions are very, very important to be examined. I really can't say much more at this stage, but we are giving a lot of thought to how we might recommend that these issues be taken forward.
And I think there's a lot to go down in that space, and certainly, as you're aware, Jenny, TDA on behalf of its TAFEs has been pushing for the public provider, which has deep educational entity characteristics and capability, to be able to potentially develop to be self-accrediting, and that would no doubt be more in the micro-credential space at post-qualification level. We see that as an opportunity for innovation. So that's a comment because I've got the mic, not a question. Not so much.
I'm very aware from your submissions that that's your view.
Not so much a comment. So there's quite a number of other questions here, and the one I might now turn to is one about professional bodies. And I think this was a conversation that I was part of when I was at Parliament House with Universities Australia around the role of various professional bodies in terms of the Tertiary Education Commission. Would you like, and professional bodies also impact us in the TAFE and the VET sector, as you know. Would you like to make any comment on that one, Jenny?
Well, of course, the professional bodies are enormously important, and we will have to, or the Tertiary Education Commission will have to work very, very closely with them. One of the critiques that's been made forcefully to us is that the placement arrangements for many students in many professions are really not working very effectively. Many students can't afford to go and work on unpaid placements, for example. I won't go through all the different areas, but there are many different professional areas where placements are essential for the skills and education that students need to get. Employers emphasise this repeatedly with us in the conversations that we've had with them. So we understand just how important these placements are. So which ones should be paid? How should they be paid? Who should pay them? These are critical issues. Just to choose one big issue that needs to be worked out both with employers and with professional associations. So there are many, many issues that the professional associations have raised with us, that employers have raised with us. So I think a lot of that is another reason why we need a tertiary education commission, because we really need employers, the professional associations, universities to come together and really nut out what the answers to these questions are. There isn't a place where that happens in a systematic way at the moment. And so we've ended up with terrible shortages in so many areas, so many professional areas.
And it's certainly that whole notion of placements it plays into the equity conversation as well, doesn't it? Because
absolutely,
yeah, you know.
Well, we've had so many representations to us about people not being able to complete their course because they just can't afford to go on an unpaid placement, or they can't afford the housing costs. If they have to maintain a house in the city or a rural area or vice versa. These are incredibly important issues that for students, and we don't want to lose those students that might be 3/4 of their way through a course just because they can't afford to do the placement.
Jenny, there are lots of other questions coming through on our Q&A, but I'm going to ask you one more, and then we will finish, because the Minister left us a bit early. For the benefit of the audience, the Minister won't be back. He's caught in question time. We appreciate the time he gave us, but one more question for you, Jenny, and then I might make a couple of other comments on some of the other questions that are here. When you were doing the work on the Accord, you would have looked at some overseas systems, and one of the first questions that came up on the Q&A was specific about a country, but I'm going to ask it in a bit of a more broad way. Was there anything you saw that you really thought that would be great in Australia?
First and foremost, where Australia is in the world in achieving both the participation of different equity groups in higher education. We are not doing as well as we should be if you look at the international comparisons. And then secondly, looking at international comparisons for overall higher education participation. If we want to be a country that is about having the knowledge and skills that delivers higher productivity, that delivers the economic growth, that delivers the social cohesion, that addresses the really hard questions that are part of our desired clean energy future, then we have to do more than we're doing, and we have to be right at the top internationally. They're the big things that come through to me when you look at the international comparisons. We want to be the best, and we can be, but we have to work together to do it, both vocational education and higher education. And I think we're in a great place to do that.
Well, that is a great place to finish, Jenny. So thank you so much for giving us considerable time today to share some.
I'll have a word with Brendan O'Connor about
giving you more time.
Question time always wins out.
Look, there are a few other questions. Just a couple of comments on some of those questions. There's a question there on higher apprenticeships. I think it's early days, and I think that one we might pick up in the next session with Sally and Megan. So if you're joining that one, we might pick that up as well. There's a question there on where schools play. Well, this conversation today was really about the tertiary sector, the post-school sector, really big piece to bite around schools as well. Today we were really talking about post-compulsory. There's a few questions there on funding. But I think what this demonstrates, and Jenny's engagement with this, is how much thinking is going on by some really committed people at the Accord level, at the National Skills Agreement level, at the broader work that's happening in the vet sector as well. And Jenny, I think on behalf of everyone, and there's a lot of hand clapping, virtual hand clapping come up. Thank you very much for your time today, your experience, the way in which the Accord panel has genuinely engaged has been so welcomed and so refreshing. And thank you again, Jenny, for your time today.
Thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. So now to the audience, you do have to, for the next session, we're finishing just a couple of minutes early, so you get a little bit longer break, but only 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes. Please get a drink or we'll do whatever you have to do. You do need to join the next session out of the lobby by clicking on join. And our next session, we welcome Megan Lilly and Sally Kiff to talk about the AQF, the work that they did, and some forward thinking that they now have about what next. Thank you again, Jenny Macklin. Thank you everyone for participating. We're going to leave you now and we look forward to the next session. Please return to the lobby and we will see you in about 10, 15 minutes. Thanks all.